The Galactic Council chambers had never been this quiet before. Normally, these halls were filled with the voices of hundreds of species, debating, scheming, forging alliances. But today, there was only silence and fear. Chancellor Zhao Run of the Zorkai Dominion stood at the center of the massive chamber, his scaled hands gripping the podium. His voice, usually commanding, now wavered. "We must bring the humans back to the table," he said. No one responded. Because everyone in the room knew the truth. There was no table anymore. The message that changed everything. It had been 3 days since humanity ceased all diplomatic contact. No transmissions. No envoys. No explanations. Nothing. And that silence, more than anything else, terrified the council. Because the last time humanity had gone silent, entire fleets had vanished. And now it was happening again. High Admiral Threx of the Veil Confederacy slammed his fist against the war table. His exoskeletal frame trembled with barely contained panic. "You do not understand," he growled. "Humanity doesn't make threats. They don't warn. They don't negotiate." His 4 insectoid eyes scanned the room. When they go silent, they are already moving. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. Zhao Run exhaled. "There must be something we can offer them," he said, desperate. "Peace treaties. Reparations. Concessions." His voice faltered. They wouldn't wipe us out over a war, would they?" Toph Kell, the last surviving general from the First Human War, closed his eyes. "They wouldn't," he admitted. Then he looked up. "But they already decided. And they won't stop until they're done." Humanity's final words. 3 days ago, the last human message had been received. It had been short, cold, final. The holographic projection flickered to life, displaying Admiral Jonas Calloway, his battle-scarred face unreadable. The council chamber had held its breath as he spoke. "This is our last communication," Calloway had said. "You had your chance." He leaned forward, his voice turning dark. "Absolute. We are done talking." And then, the transmission ended. No further messages came. And that was when the council realized what was about to happen. The first world falls. The first human strike came without warning. The Zurkai Republic, one of the largest factions in the council, had 6 planetary defense fleets guarding their home system. They were some of the strongest military forces in the known galaxy. They lasted 15 minutes. Human warships, silent, invisible to scanners, bypassed their defenses entirely. A single Terran dreadnought entered orbit. It fired once. A kinetic impact strike, a 10,000-ton tungsten rod, descending at relativistic speeds. The Zurkai homeworld cracked open like glass. 15 billion souls, gone. The humans never claimed responsibility. They didn't need to, because everyone already knew. Panic consumes the council. "Their methods have changed," Ambassador Clorth of the Zelvarn Confederacy stammered, his scaled hands shaking. "They are not waging war. They are." He swallowed. "They are making examples." The council chamber erupted in hysteria. "We must surrender," someone shouted. "There is nowhere to run," another screamed. Chancellor Zhao Run's voice cut through the chaos. Silence. The chamber stilled, hundreds of eyes locking onto him. "We must understand why they are doing this," he said. "They could have destroyed us years ago. Why now? Why this?" Toph Kell exhaled. "Because they gave us one last chance." His voice was empty. "And we ignored it." The mistake that doomed the galaxy. The room went still. Because deep down they all knew. It had started months ago when the council approved the Draknath incident. A human colony world, isolated, unarmed, had been raided. Not by the council directly, but by their proxies, council-backed mercenary fleets who had been given quiet permission to do as they pleased. Humanity had demanded justice. The council had denied them. They had buried the reports, hidden the evidence, called it a tragic accident. They had lied. And humanity had found out. The shadow war begins. "They are coming," Toph Kell murmured. He wasn't guessing. He was certain. Because he had seen it before. His people, once rulers of their own vast empire, had waged war against humanity decades ago. They had lost. But the humans had let them live. They had left a warning. And now the council had ignored it. "They will not stop," he said. "Not until we are nothing but stories." A single holographic display flickered to life. Live footage from the border worlds. The humans had already begun. The hunt begins. From the depths of space, human fleets emerged like phantoms. They did not conquer. They did not claim territory. They simply erased. One by one, the Council's core worlds vanished. No distress signals. No survivors. No mercy. The Council chamber shook as reports flooded in. The Zelvarn homeworld, gone. The Veil Confederacy, vanished. The Zurkai Republic, nothing but fire. Panic overtook the Council. They are hunting us, an ambassador shrieked. Zalrun could barely breathe. This wasn't war. This was annihilation. And for the first time he understood. Humanity hadn't lost faith in diplomacy. They had lost faith in them. And that meant only one thing. The Galactic Council was already dead. They just hadn't realized it yet. The Galactic Council no longer ruled. It no longer commanded fleets. It no longer held influence. And soon, it would no longer exist. Because humanity had decided. There would be no negotiations. There would be no surrender. There would be no survivors. And across the galaxy the hunt had begun. The fall of the Zurtal Armada. The Zurtal High Fleet was one of the most feared military forces in the known universe. Hundreds of warships. Planetary siege-class dreadnoughts. Elite battlecruisers that had crushed rebellions before they could begin. They were the Council's enforcers, the ones who had kept the other species in line for centuries. And when the first human fleet appeared, the Zurtal commanders were not afraid. "This is where we turn the war," High Warlord Vectan declared aboard his flagship, the Tyrant's Claw. "Humans have become arrogant. We will remind them of their place." His fleet stood ready for battle. They had numbers. They had firepower. They had experience. What they did not have was a chance. The death of a war fleet. The battle lasted 4 minutes. Not 4 hours. Not 4 days. 4 minutes. Because the humans did not fight fair. They did not line up in formation. They did not engage in a grand space battle. They hunted. The Zurtal Armada never saw them coming. A single Terran stealth corvette infiltrated their formation, jamming their long-range sensors. By the time they realized what was happening, it was already over. Kinetic bombardments tore through their flagship's hull like paper. EMP strikes crippled their targeting systems. And when the Zurtal ships tried to retreat, they found themselves boxed in. Because the real human fleet had already surrounded them. And then, the bombing runs began. A single Terran battleship, the Nemesis, fired its experimental graviton warhead. The Zurtal warships were pulled into each other, ripped apart by their own mass. A fleet that had ruled for centuries, erased in seconds. And in the end, there was only silence. The Zurtal were gone. And humanity did not leave a single message. Because they had already spoken. And the galaxy was listening. The Council's last desperate plan. The Council's survivors gathered on Crowley's 7, a hidden fortress world deep in the galactic core. It was their last stronghold. The only place where they could still make a final stand. Chancellor Zalrun paced before the remaining Council leaders. "We have one chance left," he growled. "One final play." A battered General Tovkel looked up, his scales dull, his eyes sunken. "And what," he rasped, "do you propose?" Zalrun's voice lowered. "We use the Omega Protocol." The room fell into stunned silence. Even Tovkel recoiled. "The Omega Protocol is forbidden," he hissed. Zalrun's gaze burned. "So is extinction?" The remaining Council members hesitated. Because they knew what the Omega Protocol meant. It meant using the failsafe. A doomsday weapon buried deep beneath Crowley's 7, a planetary destabilizer capable of turning entire solar systems into unstable novas. If activated, it would wipe out the Sol system. It would end humanity. It was their only chance. But before anyone could answer, the alarms blared. The human fleet had arrived. The death of Crowley's 7. The Council's last stronghold lasted exactly 7 minutes. Because humanity had been listening. They had already intercepted the Omega Protocol. They knew what was coming. And so, they struck first. Terran stealth operatives infiltrated the planet's core facilities days before the Council even arrived. And at the moment Zalrun ordered the Omega Protocol to begin, the failsafe was already destroyed. The humans had turned it against them. And as the Council's warships scrambled to react, the orbital bombardment began. Fire rained from the skies. The last war fleets burned. The last planetary shields collapsed. The last stronghold of the Galactic Council crumbled into dust. And when the smoke cleared, there was nothing left. No council. No leaders. No survivors. Just a dead planet. And a galaxy that would never be the same. The final words of humanity. Across the stars, as the remaining civilizations watched in horror, a single transmission was broadcast. A final message from Earth. It did not come from a diplomat. It did not come from a warlord. It came from a soldier. A lone human stood in front of a burning war zone, battle-scarred, weary, unshaken. His voice was calm, cold, final. This was never a war. This was justice. There will be no rulers of the galaxy. Not us. Not you. No one. The soldier stepped closer, and his next words sent a chill through the stars. The era of empires is over. If anyone forgets that. A long heavy pause. Then the soldier stared directly into the camera. We will remind you. The transmission ended. And with it, so did the Galactic Council. The Galactic Council was no more. Its leaders, dead. Its fleets, gone. Its empire, erased. But humanity did not celebrate. There were no victory speeches. No conquerors' banners raised. No demands for tribute. Because this was never about power. It was about ensuring no one made the same mistake again. And now, as the dust settled across the stars, the galaxy faced a new reality. One where humanity was not a ruler, but a ghost. A shadow lingering in the darkness. Watching. Waiting. Ensuring the silence remained. The aftermath of extinction. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy had no central government. No overlords. No masters. No tyrants shaping the fate of billions. What remained of the other civilizations hid in the void, terrified to draw attention to themselves. Because they knew. The humans were still out there. And if anyone dared to rebuild what was destroyed, humanity would return. So the stars fell quiet. The once mighty Zurkai clans, reduced to nomads, drifting through the dark, too afraid to claim a homeworld. The Veil Consortium, once the richest trading empire in the universe, now lived in shattered stations too terrified to form alliances. And the surviving generals of the council? They did not try to fight back. They disappeared. Because they knew there was no war left to fight. Only the consequences of losing. The hunt never ends. Humanity had no borders. No territories. No conquered worlds. But it had eyes everywhere. In the abandoned corridors of once mighty empires, human drones watched. In the depths of unknown space, Terran warships remained cloaked, waiting. And when whispers of new alliances or attempts to rebuild power began to spread, those whispers died. No one knew how the humans struck. Only that when they did, the ones responsible were never heard from again. It wasn't war. It wasn't diplomacy. It was a lesson. One the galaxy had learned too late. The fall of the last council remnant. Deep in the ruins of a forgotten moon, the last survivors of the council gathered. A handful of exiled leaders, former generals, and desperate warlords. They had sworn to rise again. To rebuild the council. To avenge their fallen empire. But the moment they spoke the words aloud, humanity heard them. The final strike. It began with silence. Then shadows moved. And one by one the exiled warlords vanished. No alarms. No warnings. No survivors. The last remnants of the council ceased to exist. And when the remaining exiles awoke from their nightmares, they found a single message carved into the walls of their bunker. A message left in their own language. You were warned. The final council transmission. Before the last chancellor, Zhao Run, disappeared, he sent out one final transmission. Not to rally the survivors. Not to rebuild the council. But as a warning to the future. His voice was weak. Defeated. He looked hollow, his once proud robes now tattered and ruined. And as he spoke, his words would be remembered forever. We should have listened. We should have given them justice when they asked. We should have known humanity does not threaten. It only acts. And now we are nothing. To those who come after us, remember this. You cannot rule the stars. You cannot control humanity. Because if you ever try, they will return. The transmission cut out. And Zhao Run was never seen again. The age of silence. Centuries passed. No council. No galactic senate. No attempts to rebuild the fallen order. Only small, scattered civilizations, too afraid to grow too powerful. Because somewhere in the void, humanity still remained. Watching. Waiting. And the galaxy never dared to test them again. Because if they did, they knew what would come next. The silence would be broken. And humanity would remind them why it existed in the first place. To end tyrants. To erase corruption. To ensure no empire would ever rise again. Because humanity had learned the cost of diplomacy. And now, it had no interest in talking. The Galactic Council was gone. Its legacy? Nothing but ruins. Its laws? Forgotten. The great empires that had ruled for thousands of years were now nothing more than scattered, fearful remnants. And in the silence left behind, humanity watched, not as conquerors, not as rulers, not as tyrants, but as the final warning, a reminder that the age of diplomacy was over, and any who tried to rebuild what was lost would never get the chance. The survivors live in fear. For the first time in history, the galaxy had no central power. Trade routes? Abandoned. Alliances? Shattered. Governments? Dissolved. What remained were fragments of civilizations too afraid to grow, too afraid to unite, because they all knew the one truth that bound them together. If humanity saw them as a threat, they would cease to exist. And so the stars stayed quiet, not out of peace, but out of fear. The Ghost Fleet disappears. After the war, the Ghost Fleet vanished. The warships that had burned empires to the ground disappeared into the void. No one knew where they had gone. No one dared to search for them. Because if humanity was still out there, that meant the war was never truly over. It simply had no reason to continue. And no one in the galaxy was willing to give them one. The Council's greatest mistake. For centuries, historians whispered about the fall of the Galactic Council. How an empire that had ruled for millennia was destroyed in a single generation. How they had ignored humanity's warnings. How they had refused to give justice when asked. And how, in the end, they had begged for peace, only to be met with silence. It was not an invasion. Not a war for territory. It was punishment. And it had been absolute. The last attempt to rebuild. Nearly 1,000 years after the war, in the ruins of an abandoned world, whispers of a new government began to spread. A handful of civilizations gathered in secret, speaking of unity, order, leadership. They wanted to rebuild the Galactic Council, to bring back the old ways, to restore what humanity had erased. And for a time, they believed they could, until the first ones disappeared. Then the second, then the third. No traces, no warnings, no survivors. And when the last of them tried to flee, they found a message waiting, carved into the walls of their hidden chambers. A message written in their own language. No rulers. They never tried again. The final transmission. For 1,000 years the stars were silent. Then one day, a signal echoed across the galaxy. A message from an unknown location. A voice calm and absolute. A voice human. And it said only one thing. We are still here. The message ended. No further transmissions followed. Because none were needed. The galaxy had been warned. And no one would ever forget. The era of empires had ended. And humanity had ensured it would never return. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling sci-fi tales.